The sun hung low over the jagged hills of Gravenrock, casting long shadows over the broken stones. Dry winds swept through the valley, stirring dust over the ruins of a once great city. Cale Ashwind moved carefully, his bare hands darkened by dirt and old soot. He worked in silence, chipping at the stone wall with a rusted pickaxe, hoping for a fragment of copper or silver. Around him, dozens of other humans toiled, their faces hollow, their clothes torn. Elf overseers watched from stone towers above, dressed in silver robes and holding long black staves. They did not speak unless it was to command or punish. Humans had not ruled these lands for hundreds of years, not since the elves came with their ski ships and magic. Cale paused, wiping his brow. Something beneath the rock shimmered faintly. He looked around. No one was watching. Quickly, he dug deeper, pulling away stones with his hands. A strange metal surface revealed itself, round and pulsing with a soft orange glow. His heart pounded. This was not ore. It was something old, something buried. He touched it. The metal was warm. A sudden spark jumped from it into his palm. Cale gasped, falling back. Images flashed in his mind. Flames rising, voices shouting in a language he didn't know, and a great figure wearing armor made of fire. A voice whispered in his ear, though no one stood near, "You are the Ember's heir." He blinked. The glow faded, but the shape remained. A symbol burned into the dirt, a spiral surrounded by flame. Before he could think, a loud horn rang out. The elf guards had seen something. "Step away," one shouted, pointing his staff. Energy crackled at the tip. Cale stood. The symbol pulsed again. Power rushed through his limbs. Without thinking, he raised his hand. The ground trembled, and a wave of heat burst from the stone, knocking the guard off his feet. Gasps followed. The other humans backed away in fear. Cale stared at his hand. It still glowed faintly. He had done something impossible. A whistle pierced the air. More guards were coming. Cale turned and ran, leaping over broken stones, dodging sharp rocks. The shouts grew louder behind him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. For the first time, he knew the elves could bleed. And now, they would learn what humans could become. Cale moved through the tunnels beneath the old stone roads, his feet light and quick. The elves had been searching for him for days now. Posters with his face, drawn in ink and fear, hung on every gate. He did not stop. He could not. The mark on his hand still glowed faintly, hidden under a worn glove. He kept it covered, but sometimes he could feel it pulsing, like it was calling to something deep in the earth. The tunnels were quiet tonight. Water dripped from the stone ceiling. Torchlight flickered on the walls. Cale followed the narrow path until he reached a wooden door, half rotten and marked with old human symbols. He knocked once, then twice more. The door opened, and a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a young woman, thin but sharp-eyed, her clothes patched and dusty. "You're late," she said. "I had to cross 3 patrols," Cale replied. She led him inside. The room was small and dim, filled with worn maps and scraps of paper. A group of humans sat around a low table. Their faces were tired, some marked by old scars. "This is him," the woman said. "Cale Ashwind." The others stared. One man stood. "We heard stories," he said. "Magic, fire, glowing hands. You really expect us to believe it?" Cale pulled off the glove. The symbol on his hand lit up the room with a soft orange glow. No one spoke. "I don't want to be your leader," Cale said, "but I found something buried, something old, something the elves tried to keep from us. I think it's only the beginning." An older woman leaned forward. "The Ember Sigil," she whispered. "I've read about it. In books long burned." Cale nodded. "The elves fear it," he said. "They fear what we were before they came. They fear what we can be again." One man stood, angry. "We've lived in the dirt too long. They have ski ships, magic towers, spells that can freeze rivers. What do we have? Broken tools and empty hands." Cale walked to the center of the room. "I don't have all the answers," he said, "but I know this. I made one of them fall. I made him bleed. They are not untouchable, not anymore." The room was silent. Then the older woman stood. "If the Ember Sigil is real," she said, "then maybe we have a chance." The others slowly nodded. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. The city above them slept under the watch of towers and spells. But deep beneath the streets, something had changed. The chains were still heavy, but the fire had been lit. Cale walked through the narrow path of the Blackroot Woods, where the trees grew too close and their leaves blocked the moonlight. The air was damp, filled with the scent of moss and old bark. Behind him, 4 others followed. None of them spoke. Silence was safer. They had left the tunnels 2 nights ago. Their goal was clear: reach the old place called the Living Scroll. It was not made of paper, nor kept in any library. It was a tower grown from a tree older than the oldest elf. Its roots dug into the world's memory. Its bark held spells carved in forgotten script. No human had ever stepped inside. No human had ever tried. The woman leading them through the forest was named Mira. She wore a deep cloak and moved like someone used to watching her back. Cale didn't fully trust her. She knew too much about elven roads, too much about elven guards. Still, she had saved his life once already, and she had gotten them this far. "We're close," she whispered, pointing through the trees. There it was, rising like a dark spire, wrapped in vines that pulsed with green light. The tower breathed. The symbols carved into its surface moved like rivers. "We go in, get what we need, and get out before it notices us," Mira said. Cale asked. "The scroll is alive. It sees. It remembers." They stepped inside. The inside of the tower was quiet, but not still. The walls shifted as they walked. Roots moved beneath the floor like sleeping snakes. Lights flickered, not from fire, but from memories. Echoes of voices, flashes of images, shadows walking where no one stood. Cale placed his hand on the wall. The ember sigil glowed brighter. The tower responded. The roots parted, revealing a stairway that led down into the heart of the tree. They followed. At the bottom, they found a chamber filled with floating stones. Each one held a memory carved in light. Cale stepped forward, and the stones began to spin. One hovered near him. An old man appeared in the light, human, wearing robes, holding the ember sigil in both hands. "We were not born weak," the voice said. "We were broken, but even broken blades can cut." Cale watched image after image, humans casting great spells, building towers, standing beside dragons, facing armies of elves. He saw the war, the fall, the betrayal. He saw how the elves had used lies and magic to steal human knowledge. Behind him, one of the rebels whispered, "We were more than they ever told us." Suddenly, a sound echoed above. The tower groaned. "They found us," Mira said. Cale turned to the stones. He grabbed one, the one glowing brightest. "Then we leave with proof," he said. They ran as roots slammed shut behind them. Outside, the woods were no longer silent. But now, Cale had something the elves could not destroy: the truth. The ember sigil pulsed against Cale's palm, its orange glow casting long shadows on the walls of the hidden camp. He could feel its power in his bones, thrumming beneath his skin. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was part of him, part of something bigger. The camp was quiet, save for the crackle of a small fire. Rebels sat in small groups, whispering to each other, their eyes flicking toward Cale as he stood alone near the edge of the clearing. The sigil had given him more than just power. It had given him a plan. "Are you sure about this?" Mira's voice broke the silence. She stepped up beside him, her face shadowed by the cloak she wore. Cale turned to her. "I've seen it. I know what we need." She looked at him, her expression hard to read. "The elves won't just let us walk in and take it. This isn't like stealing food from their markets. This is their heart, their strength." Cale glanced down at his hand. The sigil glowed brighter, almost as if in response to her words. "We'll take it, and we'll make them bleed for it." Mira stayed silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. "I've heard that before. But this time, you're not just fighting for your life. You're fighting for all of us." "I know," Cale said quietly. The fire crackled, and a few rebels gathered their things, ready for the attack. The plan was simple but dangerous. Infiltrate the Elven fortress at twilight, slip past the patrols, and steal the Ember Crown. It was the key to breaking the elves' hold over the land. Once they had it, the tide could turn. Kale had no illusions about the danger. The elves would fight to the death to keep their power, and they wouldn't just fight with swords or magic. They had creatures made from the very earth, animals twisted into weapons, but they weren't ready for humans who had nothing to lose. As night fell, the rebels moved like shadows, slipping through the darkened forest. Kale led them, his steps sure. The sigil burned on his hand, guiding them. The fortress loomed ahead, tall white walls that reached for the sky like something made by gods. Guards walked the ramparts, their figures outlined against the moonlit sky. Kale's pulse quickened. He could already feel the heat rising from the ember sigil. His hand tingled as if the sigil wanted to unleash its power. "We need to be fast," Kale whispered. "Once we're in, we don't stop." The group nodded, their faces grim but determined. They approached the base of the fortress, where ivy grew thick along the walls. Using the vines, they climbed, moving silently. The guards were too far away to hear them. At the top, Kale found a narrow ledge, just wide enough for him to crawl along. He led the way, then helped the others climb over the edge. The wind howled in the distance, but here, high above the world, it was quiet. They reached the heart of the fortress, a massive hall filled with strange glowing artifacts. At the center, on a pedestal made of silver, sat the ember crown. It shimmered with a fierce, almost painful light. Kale stepped forward, his heart pounded. This was it, the thing that would turn the tide. "This is for all of us," he whispered, reaching out. He touched the crown. The moment his fingers made contact, the air around him seemed to ignite. The sigil on his hand flared, and the room was filled with a blinding light. The elves were coming, but now Kale had something they could never control. The sky above Ivory Spire was a dull gray, as if the clouds themselves feared what was coming. From the base of the towering city, the rebels gathered in silence, their faces hard with determination. They had crossed miles of dangerous land to reach this place, and now the last step would be the hardest. Kale stood at the front, his hand still glowing faintly with the power of the ember crown. The sigil pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. This was it, the moment when everything would change. "We move in 2 hours," Kale said, his voice steady despite the weight of the task ahead. "We'll split into 2 groups. One will draw the guards to the west gate, and the other will go straight for the inner vaults." Mira, standing beside him, glanced up at the massive white walls of the spire. "You know they won't let us walk in without a fight," she said. Kale nodded. "They'd never do." He could already hear the distant hum of magic and the sharp screech of the elven warhorns. The elves had sensed something was wrong. They had to be ready. The first strike came quickly. A group of rebels, hidden in the trees, fired a volley of arrows aimed directly at the guard towers. The elven soldiers responded immediately, their voices ringing out with commands as their magic sparked in the air. Kale didn't hesitate. He raised his hand, and the ember sigil flared. A wave of heat spread across the battlefield, burning through the elven magic like paper. The first wave of guards fell back, their enchanted shields melting into pools of molten metal. The rebel group surged forward, pushing the elves back. Kale and his team ran toward the gates, moving quickly and silently. Every step felt heavier, the air thicker with the weight of what they were about to do. As they neared the gates, Kale's heart began to race. Inside, the ember crown still pulsed with power. He could feel it calling to him. But the elves were ready. As Kale reached for the gates, a crackling sound filled the air. He turned just in time to see a massive elven warship descending from the sky, its sails glowing with a soft green light. The ship's hull was lined with glowing runes, each one pulsing with dangerous energy. "They brought it," Mira whispered. "The verdant Leviathan," Kale said under his breath. The ship hovered just above the ground, its weapons aiming directly at the rebels. Soldiers began to pour out, their white armor gleaming like knives in the dim light. "Get inside the city," Kale shouted. "Now." The rebels rushed forward, breaking into smaller groups to evade the elven forces. Kale, however, stood his ground. The ember crown was almost within reach. He raised his hand again, calling upon the sigil's power. Flames erupted around him, a shield of heat and light. The elves hesitated, momentarily thrown off by the intensity of the fire. Mira turned to him, her face tight with concern. "Kale, "You're not alone in this." He didn't answer. The sigil was burning hotter now, the heat around him growing intense. The Ember Crown called to him, a song of fire and vengeance. This was the turning point. There was no going back now. With a final push, Kale sprinted forward, his hand outstretched. The moment he touched the gates, they burst open, revealing the heart of Ivory Spire. The city was theirs. But the elves would not give up so easily. They were already gathering for their counterattack, and this battle was far from over. Kale stood in the heart of the Ivory Spire, the Ember Crown clutched tightly in his hands. The room around him hummed with power, the walls covered in ancient runes that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Every step he took seemed to echo, the silence growing heavy. He could hear the distant sounds of battle outside, the clash of weapons, the crackling of magic, and the roar of the elven warship still hovering over the city. But inside the vault, all that mattered was the crown. The sigil on his hand pulsed with each beat of his heart, as if the two were connected by some invisible thread. "We've come this far," Kale murmured to himself. "This ends now." He could feel the weight of the Ember Crown in his hands, its magic ancient and vast. It was not just a weapon. It was a symbol, a key to unlocking the forgotten power of the humans, and with it, they could defeat the elves, once and for all. But even as Kale stared at the crown, doubt flickered in his mind. He had seen what the elves could do, how their magic could twist reality, shape the world to their will. He had felt the power of the sigil, yes, but he was still just one man, and the elves, with all their might, were not easily defeated. The door to the vault creaked open. Mira stepped inside, her face grim. "Kale, they're coming," she said. "We need to move now." Kale nodded but didn't move. He was rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on the crown. "We can't wait," Mira insisted, stepping closer. "We've done what we set out to do. The crown is ours, but we can't hold the spire for long." Kale turned to face her, his eyes hard. "We won't have to. Once we use this, everything changes." "We don't even know how it works," Mira said, her voice tense. "We don't know what kind of power we're dealing with." Kale clenched his jaw. He had thought about that too, but there was no turning back now. They had come this far. "We'll figure it out," Kale said, determination in his voice. "The elves have hidden the truth from us for too long. Now it's our turn to take it back." Mira hesitated, then nodded. She turned to the door. "We'll hold them off as long as we can. But don't waste time thinking about it. The elves will break through eventually." Kale watched her leave, the weight of her words sinking in. Outside, the fighting was getting closer. The elves weren't far from the vault. He looked down at the Ember Crown again. It was warm in his hands, the faint glow becoming brighter. For a moment, he wondered if this power would consume him, if he would become like the elves he had sworn to defeat, hungry for control, willing to sacrifice anything to win. But then, he remembered the faces of the rebels, their hope, their determination. They had fought beside him, and they needed him to lead them through this. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he knew what he had to do. It was time to unleash the fire. The sound of marching boots echoed through the halls of the Ivory Spire, growing louder with each passing second. Kale's heart pounded as he stood alone in the vault room, the Ember Crown still warm in his hands. He could feel the weight of the crown, not just physically, but in the very air around him. It hummed with power, a deep, vibrating energy that made his fingers tingle. The sigil on his hand burned brighter, its light flickering like a flame on the edge of extinction. He could feel the fire calling to him, drawing from the crown, from the sigil, from the very core of the earth itself. But it was a dangerous power, and for a moment, Kale hesitated. Outside, the elves were gathering, readying their magic and weapons. They would stop at nothing to reclaim the crown. Kale knew this was their last chance. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The ember sigil on his hand flared to life, and the crown seemed to pulse in response, as though alive, eager to unleash its power. He could feel the fire coursing through him now, hotter, stronger than before. It was time. Kale stepped forward, moving toward the center of the vault. He raised the ember crown above his head, holding it aloft. The light from the crown spread through the room, filling every corner with a burning glow. The power inside him surged, and he felt the air grow thick with heat. A voice whispered in his mind, "The power is yours, but at what cost?" Cale clenched his jaw, pushing the voice away. He had made this choice. He would see it through. The elves had taken everything from his people, and now it was time to take it back. The walls of the vault trembled. The magic was awakening. Cale could feel the ancient power of the crown reaching deep into the earth, pulling something far older than the elves themselves. He could feel it in his bones, the fire, the fury, the will to fight. The doors to the vault burst open. Elven soldiers stormed in, their silver armor gleaming in the dim light. Their eyes locked onto Cale, their faces cold and determined. "You think you can stand against us, human?" One of them sneered, raising a staff. The air around the soldier crackled with energy. Cale didn't answer. His hand glowed with the Sigel's light, and with a sudden motion, he thrust the ember crown toward the soldiers. The room seemed to explode. A wave of fire erupted from the crown, sweeping across the room in a torrent of flame. The elves recoiled, their shields raised in a futile attempt to block the heat. The fire did not burn them, but it pushed them back, forcing them to retreat. Cale's heart raced as the flames spread, feeling more powerful with each passing moment. He had never felt anything like this before. This was more than magic. It was the essence of his people, the fire of defiance, the spirit that had never been extinguished. "This is the fire of humanity," Cale shouted, his voice filled with conviction. "We will not be your slaves any longer." The elves hesitated, momentarily stunned by the sheer force of the fire. But Cale knew this battle was far from over. The elves would regroup, and they would come for him again. But now he had the flame, and he would burn through their walls to reclaim what was his. The fire in the vault was dying down, leaving behind a thick smoke that filled the room with a bitter scent. Cale stood at the center, his breath coming in heavy gasps, his body still humming with the power of the ember crown. The elves had retreated for now, but they would be back, and they would not make the same mistake twice. Cale glanced around at the wreckage. The soldiers who had once filled the vault were scattered across the floor, knocked back by the force of the flames. Their armor was scorched, and their weapons lay forgotten on the ground. But even with their defeat, Cale knew the true challenge was yet to come. The Elven leaders, the ones who had ruled with cruelty for centuries, would not allow such a blow to go unanswered. He wiped the sweat from his brow, feeling the weight of the ember crown still in his hands. It had given him power, but it also demanded something in return. The fire within him was not endless, and the more he used it, the more he felt it draining his strength. "Cale," Mira's voice broke through his thoughts. She was standing at the doorway, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes still sharp with determination. "They're coming. The Elven Council. They've sent everything they have." Cale nodded. "I know." The ground beneath their feet shook. Outside, the sky was darkening, filled with the shadow of the Elven airships. The Council had not just sent soldiers, they had sent their warships, their most powerful magic, their most dangerous beasts. "We have to leave," Mira said, her voice urgent. "There's no way we can fight them all." "We stand our ground," Cale replied, his voice firm. "This isn't just about survival. It's about showing them that we are not afraid." Mira stepped closer, her hand on his arm. "Cale, this isn't just your fight. We'll fight with you, but we can't do this alone." Cale turned to face her, his eyes steely with resolve. "I'm not fighting alone." He looked around at the rebels who had gathered behind him, their faces filled with a quiet strength. "We're all in this together." They heard the thunderous sound of elven war drums in the distance. The elves were closing in. Cale felt the Ember Crown's power surge again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just magic. It was the strength of every human who had ever fought for freedom. It was their anger, their hope, their will to live free. "To the gates," Cale shouted. "We push them back, or we die trying." The rebels cheered, their spirits lifted by Cale's words. They were ready. They would face the elves, not as slaves, but as warriors, fighting for their right to live. The battle began. Arrows flew through the air, and magic crackled against shields. The elves attacked with precision, but the humans fought back with the fury of those who had been oppressed for too long. Kale moved through the chaos, his hand raised high, the ember crown glowing brightly. It wasn't the end yet, but it was the beginning of something new. The flames had been lit, and there was no turning back. This was humanity's moment to rise, to show the world that they would no longer be ruled by the elves. They would fight, and they would win.